Hello and welcome to day 2 of Collaborate Virtual, the free online instalment of our annual conference, Collaborate. We had some great talks yesterday from Simon Norris, Sophie Freemuth and Joe Knowles. I have another 3 sessions coming up today from Emily Trotter and Jose Rosa, Liz Hubert and Diana Sonis. And up now, we have Nomensa's Group Account Director, George Moriarty, with her talk, Illusions of the Mind, How Your Cognitive Biases Are Getting in the Way of Innovation. In this talk, George will outline some key cognitive biases we may not know we have and provide some simple tricks to combat them that will help you and your teams collaborate better and ultimately deliver better results. As always, please get the conversation started in the chat. Make sure your settings are switched to panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your messages. Yeah, and if there are any issues with the stream or anything like that, please let us know there. Also, please do submit your questions using the Q&A function, and I will ask as many as I can to George at the end. We are using auto-generated captions. Some of these may not be 100% accurate live. However, when we share the talks publicly, we will ensure the transcripts are accurate. And finally, I'd just like to say a huge thanks to our sponsors, Balsamic and CX by Design, and partners Beamer and Bristol Creative Industries. So without further ado, I will hand over to George.
Thanks, Henry. Hi, everyone. In 1988, I was born in Great Yarmouth, England. There I am there with my granddad and my giant forehead, enjoying my first glass of wine. At the age of 3, I decided to forge a new life in America, and as luck would have it, around the same time, my dad got a job in Houston, Texas. So off we popped to the south of the USA. So for me, that meant kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, cakewalks, rodeos, Renaissance fairs, drive-throughs, pee-wee soccer, and pool parties abounded. And boy, did I look and sound the part. My squirrels became squirrels, my mirrors became mirrors, and at some point, according to that poster on the right, I was wanted for being dangerously good at piano. Then in '99, as Y2K loomed, it was time to move to Aberdeen, which my friends and I were convinced was a part of England at the time. My sport of choice changed from pee-wee soccer to field hockey. I joined scouts, took on hill walking, plucked my eyebrows to within an inch of their lives, a necessary rite of passage. And my accent took on this strange transatlantic twang you hear now. But why am I talking about all this? Well, as I moved from place to place, I took on the looks, accents, pastimes, and affectations of my new tribes. It's just one example of what I'm here to talk about today. This particular story telling of some pretty active conformity bias, that being our very human desire to fit in. Conformity relies on our minds answering the question, what's everyone else doing, rather than what we'd like it to answer, which is what's best. Of course, perms and eyebrows will grow out, but what about other instances where doing what's popular has unintended and undesirable consequences? Well, just as depicted in the film 12 Angry Men, conformity can misfire. In the case of the film, a defendant would have been mistakenly sent to their death had it not been for one dissenting view, which overturned the verdict. I'm sure you've all been in meetings too, where everyone agreed with the loudest person rather than the best idea, or a brand has conformed to the done thing in their sector rather than making a change that might see them gain a competitive advantage. Conformity, like many evolutionary hard-coded mental shortcuts, served a purpose back in 200,000 BC, but now with impending death and the prospect of a social ousting a little bit less immediately threatening, it's getting in the way of good decision-making and therefore good business. In the next 25 minutes, we're going to explore just how much of what we do in our working lives is consciously undertaken. Spoiler, not as much as you might think. What's at stake, and some tricks to help you make even better decisions. And what do I mean by better decisions? Well, innovation in business is often spoken about as the big leaps forward, right? So the moment that Apple launched the iPod or Netflix pivoted their distribution model away from just posting DVDs, ensuring its position as the entertainment behemoth we know today. But I want to expand our definition. We can all find moments to innovate in our roles, no matter what the sector or discipline. A hiring manager can innovate and find a new question or task to ensure that only the top most deserving talent gets the job. A person stacking shelves could realize it's easier to deploy straight from box to shelf to restock with ease. And in football, Brighton manager Chris Hughton following a trouncing by Liverpool in 2017, realized it was more effective to have a member of the team acting as a draft excluder to defend free kicks at one of their weakest defensive points, a practice which is now all the rage, as I'm sure many of us have seen in the Euros. The key thing to remember is that rarely is innovation a result of a single person. So if opportunities for innovation are all around, so are opportunities to halt it in our own work and that of others. Even in instances where indeed one person had that eureka moment, they needed the belief and resources of a lot of other people to make it happen. I bet that's true of a lot of you here today. We are, in the nicest possible way, often cogs in a beautiful machine, and have the power to either support and accelerate the innovation our people are capable of, or slow it down and stop it. Our CEO, Simon, in his opening address on Monday, covered the concept of plussing within teams. That's building on ideas, critiquing, questioning, adding perspectives, adding rigor. This is not a moving image, by the way. Your mind is creating that movement. And if you like that, strap in, because I have an extended metaphor coming your way. Now, you're not meant to be able to read this one, don't worry. It's just meant to show the size of what we're up against here when it comes to hindering innovative ideas and new practices. Conformity is just one example of a cognitive bias, the spokes on this image here, of which scientists over the last 50 years or so have uncovered a further 200. Bit scary, right? Well, as Kahneman says in Thinking Fast and Slow, it's about giving ourselves a vocabulary. Just as doctors have words to describe ailments, it'll help us spot decision-making errors in ourselves and more easily in others. In his now famous text, Kahneman's goal is simple, to just encourage us to talk about this stuff, perhaps after a meeting at the water cooler, or these days, the virtual one. I realize that was a lot of words. So first, we'll unpack what a cognitive bias is. We'll look at the two systems of the mind. There's that extended metaphor with illusions. We're then just going to home in on 3 biases and some helpful hacks to counteract them, because the brain you have in your head now evolved to meet needs very different from those you're presented with today, in the workplace and in your wider life. It's constantly trying to avoid information overload. In the same way that electricity finds the path of least resistance, so it leans on intuition and repetition to function in our modern age. Now, I can't upgrade your brain OS, but we can work to learn about hacks to get the most from what you've been given, to stop your animal brain riding roughshod over some decisions that need a bit more time to make the right call. I don't know all your roles inside and out, so as you listen, try to write down your own examples of where you see these mental shortcuts at play, and any of your own hacks that you can think up and maybe even embed into processes. Learning about how and why you and your colleagues, clients, and customers are wired in the way we all are is the first step. I won't dive too far into the world of evolution, except to say that your brain evolved a long time ago through various iterations to meet the needs of the day. Staying alive, procreating, avoiding enemies, having enough food, avoiding unnecessary risk. So it's all based on a hell of a lot of fear. Your brain today is therefore a result of thousands of years of evolution. That means thousands of possible versions of you didn't make it because they were slightly worse at staying alive and passing on their genes. And that's left a legacy in our brains, much like how we have an appendix that used to be useful for digesting grass, but now just sits around waiting to occasionally get infected. We literally have parts of our brain that scientists call the reptilian and mammalian brains that handle basic decision-making for us, saving the human parts of our brain time to crack on with only those decisions that require heavy-duty human thinking. Unlike the appendix, these bits of our brains are really useful. We still need them to do the heavy lifting each day, so we don't have to consciously think about things like time to blink, or that was painful, I think I'll start to move my hand away from that hot plate. We make about 20,000 decisions in a day, so we can't make all of these consciously. We need a way to divide and conquer. As you can see, system 1 takes most of the responsibility here, only passing problems over to system 2 when it needs to. This dual way of thinking about the brain's processing was first thought up by psychologists Keith Stanovich and Richard West, and popularized by Daniel Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow. System 1 being fast, 2 being slow. The fun thing here is that even this naming itself has been carefully selected to minimize cognitive load. So you can quickly compute when I say 1 and 2, and then you're able to pay attention to the words that I'm saying afterwards. Isn't that meta? Right, take a look at this video. About 50% of people don't get this one. So as I say, about 50% of people who watch that film miss the gorilla. Apologies if you've seen that one before. To make sure that precious 5% is spent on the right things, we're very selective with what we pay attention to and make conscious choices about. And we live in an increasingly information-rich age where the amount of content created every second is far more than a human could absorb in a lifetime. Our working lives suffer from this too. Just like missing that ape, the brain is overloaded with info and tries to sort the wheat from the chaff, the thought-worthy from the not. For System 1 to power through all the decisions it needs to, it relies on mental shortcuts, or what you might describe as rules of thumb or gut feel. It remembers things that have worked before, it looks for cues as to what's popular, and many other shortcuts to get to answers fast. These heuristics lead to biases or systematic errors. This is the foundation of behavioral economics, that we sometimes act in predictably irrational ways as a result of our very animal route to consciousness. Let's just do a quick exercise so you 100% understand what I mean by systems 1 and 2. Right, Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow uses this example. Well, he didn't use cat Slater, that's all me. What do you see? This is an image of a woman. She appears to be het up. You start to predict what will happen next, maybe some unkind words. Your premonition came to mind automatically and effortlessly. Your reaction to the picture didn't feel like something you had to do, it just happened. It's an example of fast thinking. Now try this one. And yes, I used a random name generator here. Hildegard is taller than Brian, but shorter than Mo. Daniel is taller than Aurelia, but shorter than Hildegard. Who is tallest? Now this one takes something, right? You're no doubt keeping a little mental model going and slotting in the new names as they come up to see who comes out on top. Maybe you know you could solve it if you had a paper and pen or have started scribbling. If you got to Mo, well done. But either way, you experienced slow thinking as you proceeded through a sequence of steps. Carrying out the computation was a strain. The work was deliberate, effortful, and orderly. The event was not only in your mind, your muscles will have slightly tensed, your blood pressure and your heart rate will have risen, and your pupils will have dilated. Your pupils contracted to normal size again once you completed the puzzle or gave up. As we've seen, when System 1 is in gear, so that's 95% of the time, it's using heuristics or rules of thumb to make all those decisions for you. Your brain is constantly interpreting everything you see and filling in the blanks or spotting patterns to jump to conclusions, which most of the time is super useful. But sometimes it creates illusions, just like optical ones. Take a look at this. What do you see? At first, you probably see a white outline triangle sitting below a dark triangle. Now, of course, that's not what's really there, is it? In reality, they are merely partial lines and circles, and your brain creates the shape of a triangle out of empty space, because that's what it expects to see. It's the most likely scenario to explain this combination of shapes. This illusion is called the Kanitsa triangle, named after the psychologist Gaetano Kanitsa, who developed it in 1955. UX designers often leverage this effect to their advantage. by influencing what people see or think they see by the use of shapes and colors. Here's a famous one featured in Dan Ariely's book, Predictably Irrational. Do the middle circles in black look different sizes to you? If so, which one's bigger? They are in fact the same size. The small circles surrounding our middle circle on the left serve to make it look bigger relatively. And in their absence, the illusion is lost. Take a look at this. The image is unremarkable. Two lines of different lengths with little fins attached at either end. It's actually one of the oldest optical illusions in the book, named after Franz Müller-Lyer, who created it in 1889. The lines are in fact the same length. Here's a dynamic version of the same effect. So the blue and black radial lines in this GIF are actually always the same length. Here's another one that makes people want to get their rulers out. If you haven't seen this one before, you'll be surprised to hear that the gray horizontal lines are parallel. It was first described under the name kindergarten illusion in 1898, but was rediscovered right here in Bristol, outside a cafe at the bottom of St. Michael's Hill by this guy, Richard Gregory, in 1973, earning its name, the cafe wall illusion. Right, one last one. As we've said, your eyes, just like your mind, are filling in blanks all the time. To have a bit of fun proving that last point, and you may have done this one before, it's a test to find your blind spot. That's the bit of your retina where there's actually no optical receptors. You can't see anything because it's where the optic nerve comes out. It's a little bit like how there's no sink where the plug hole is. Okay, I'll do this one with you. I want you to come very close to your screen or bring your screen close to you towards the dot on the left. And I want you to cover your left eye to get as close as you can. And I'm going to do this as well. And then once you're really close, pan back around about 1 centimeter every second. Keep your eyes on the circle. And at some point, around about 20 centimeters back, 40 centimeters back, the cross on the right is going to disappear there. It's happened for me here. I'm about 20 centimeters back, but it'll be different based on your screen size. If you glance at the cross, it reappears, but if you keep your eye trained on the circle, it's gone. That's your blind spot. And it's not a black hole, is it? Your mind has replicated the stuff around it because that's probably what's there. It got it wrong in this case because there's a big old cross that it hadn't banked on. Now, these might all be a mere bit of fun, but for the fact they mirror the way the brain is wired. Just like seeing things as bigger if they're surrounded by small things, or filling in blanks, our brain creates these shortcuts to quickly make sense of the world around us. We receive millions of sensory inputs every second. The estimate is 40 million. That's every second. And it's trying to quickly make sense of all that input, whilst giving enough mental capacity to all those other things we have to decide or do at the same time. Hard-coded into your brain are hundreds of mental illusions. These, like their optical counterparts, lead to accidental misidentification of the world around us, things appearing bigger, more important, easier than they are, and therefore errors in decision-making and missed opportunities for innovation. Now that we understand why heuristics exist and have a good metaphor for their behavior, let's dive in and look at 3 of those 200 known biases in your brain. To innovate, we must be open to new ideas and ways of doing things. In order to capitalize on changing consumer needs or market conditions, or as we've said before, just to find little efficiencies and steps forward in your existing working practices, our minds must be open to new ideas, but they're not wired to be. That's due to confirmation bias. How many times have you heard a good idea trounced by, we tried that, or that's not how we do things? That's confirmation bias at play. We tend to pay attention to and recall only the facts which back up our existing beliefs and ways of doing things, and ignore or reject the ones that undermine them. And we're all at it. This evidence feels particularly relevant having just finished watching the Euros. As Schotten writes about in his excellent book, The Choice Factory, when psychologists Hastorf and Cantrell made students from Dartmouth and Princeton watch footage from a particularly bloody grudge match and asked who committed more fouls, the results were conclusive. Students were twice as likely to see the opposition commit a foul as they were to spot one from their own team. The match was being seen through a lens of confirmation. Charlie Munger said, The human mind is a lot like the human egg, in that the human egg has a shutoff device. One sperm gets in and it shuts down so that the next one can't get in. The human mind has a big tendency of the same sort. Can you think of examples of this in your own life or those around you? Maybe how hard it is to change someone's mind about how they vote, what kind of food they eat, the brands they buy, what they watch. It's all deemed to be right and other choices are shut off. But in the workplace, when will this bias act against you? Well, I think this one is a pretty obvious kryptonite to innovative ideas. The best solutions won't get a look in. We'll be too bound by what we think we know. Many people believe this is why the neobanks like Starling, Monzo, Revolut stole so much market share upon entry. They started with a blank piece of paper and built in a truly user-centered way, rather than being bound by legacy systems and beliefs. Confirmation bias is exacerbated by our egos. We have a personal interest in justifying our current beliefs in the workplace to avoid looking silly, especially if we're senior. It might look like only seeking out facts that support your existing beliefs, not commissioning work to counter this, even if you're met with opposing facts and data, not paying them any mind. Have a think now about how confirmation bias might be acting on you and those around you in your role. Like the monkey in that Simpsons clip, be aware of when your animal brain is at the steering wheel and making you ignore Marge and the facts. Keep an open brief to begin with. It's why discoveries are positioned before alphas in the government digital services framework. And it's why not all discoveries indeed lead to an alpha. Does the problem that we think existed really exist? Will a new service really solve it? Particularly important in Sprint Zero, that's the planning day or sometimes weeks that we undertake before starting to build something new in agile methodology. Leave assumptions at the door. Start workshop exercises around functional feature design with how might we achieve X outcome, to ensure that thinking goes back to the why, not the pre-existing beliefs of how our brand will meet that need. Where possible, avoid developing hypotheses like, I think this research will show that people choose us because of the quality of our service. Go in with an open mind to avoid only finding evidence that proves you right. Confirmation bias is not only in your mind, but in the mind, pardon me, but in the minds of those other cogs that you need to convince of your exciting new innovation. Lean into that and give this work the time and attention it deserves. Use the data. User research is a great way to overturn misheld beliefs in ourselves and others. In particular, using video or verbatim from real people can be really powerful. As we like to say at Nomensa, no Nomensan is an island, and we benefit from power of two working. How can you introduce objectivity, like working with a critical friend, a separate internal team, or an external agency to get away from internally held beliefs? Okay, so that's confirmation. But do you want to know what bias makes confirmation even more dangerous? Overconfidence or optimism bias has been called the most pervasive and potentially catastrophic of all the cognitive biases to which human beings fall victim. It has been blamed for lawsuits, strikes, wars, stock market bubbles and crashes, and indeed the ill-fated Titanic pictured here. Have you ever heard stories like those of the Titanic and thought things like, I'd have spotted the iceberg? Or like these people here, there was definitely room on that door for two people. I'd have totally saved Jack. You are not alone in thinking you are above average. Most people do, which for anyone with even the most basic understanding of how an average is calculated will make you aware of this pervasive bias. It is to systematically overestimate our performance. Like how in Ola Stevenson's 1981 experiment, it was found that 88% of drivers believed they are safer than average. We also over-egg our ability to predict outcomes we have no control over, such as sporting events, hence one of the reasons why the gambling industry is so successful. It also manifests as an underestimation of the time taken for us to complete a task, like the Sydney Opera House, taking 10 years and 95 million more Australian dollars to complete than first estimated. When will it work against you? Overconfidence in the existing solution, like the famous last words of BlackBerry's CEO, Jim Balsillie, whilst watching the 2007 iPhone launch, will be fine. It might be overconfidence that my product or service will outshine the competition with its obvious USP, so I don't need to keep funding its advancement or other areas of my conversion funnel, like marketing, to push people to my product or service. Overconfidence in a new solution may also lead you to accidentally throw the baby out with the bathwater without realizing which elements of our existing solution really work and delight users now. I've certainly heard tales of this one. It's also evident in scoping. We tend to underestimate the time taken to complete a task, as you'll recall from the Sydney Opera House story, and can promise too much from ourselves and our teams when asked to quote or scope for a new piece of work. Those most prone to this bias will also win the microphone over the potentially more correct but quieter voices in your teams. So if that's what's at risk, how can we counteract it? First off, be aware of innovation for innovation's sake. Stay focused on user needs or the problem you're solving, not what you have no doubt will be a shinier or potentially award-winning solution. Safety and inclusivity. Encourage a culture of what's called psychological safety. In our team meetings, we share a tale of a fail. Everyone makes mistakes every day. There are no exceptions. Successful teams identify them and learn not to repeat them. If we're scared of making any mistakes, that'll get in the way of new ideas. Bake practices in that will ensure you hear less confident voices like asynchronous working and anonymous communication channels. And these next two are about bringing innovative ideas to life, as a prolonged timeline could be the death of many a great idea. Agile is a great hack here, so you can tackle any setbacks as they arise and give things the time they deserve based on complexity and impact. Estimating timelines better, so look back at your company or your team's or your own performance against predicted effort. How do you compare with the time and effort you thought that task would take? Consider building in an overconfidence factor when receiving time estimates from your team, for example. If they predict something will take 8 weeks, do you apply your overconfidence factor and report 10 weeks so that within your business, this one is, again, especially useful in sprint 0. Pay attention to the feedback users are giving you on any product or service that you may be currently providing or developing. Don't let it be like water off an overconfident duck's back. Which leads us on to our third and final false friend, status quo. Caused by a lack of attention, status quo bias is our strong tendency to stick with the default option, which is the outcome that occurs if we do not choose otherwise. This bias is easily exploited, and I'm sure you'll recognize these from your personal lives. Have you ever signed up for a free trial and then been paying a membership months or even years later? Only last week, Now TV took $4.99 off me because I was lassoed in by the promise of a free trial to watch Mayor of Easttown. They win this time. Gyms use this to their advantage when asking you to set up a direct debit. Energy providers and mortgage lenders will switch loyal customers onto a higher tariff or rate of interest when they've exited the initial promotional period. And governments also use this one to their advantage, as shown here. The rollout of the auto-enrollment pensions in the UK led to an over 22 percentage point increase in people saving for later life. This is because it was more cognitive effort to opt out than it was to just let it take a fraction of your pay packet each month automatically. But in business, watch out for when status quo is making you ask the wrong questions. Now, a lot of people argue that Henry Ford never said this, but that's okay. It's just an example of customers being easily able to describe a problem they're having. In this case, wanting to get somewhere faster, but not necessarily the best solution. I think this one might be the most obvious bias that inhibits innovation, as following the status quo means you and your team are likely to mimic the kinds of behaviors, processes, products, and services that already exist or that you inherited, and not question or improve them. The thought to raise any of these to the ground and start again to build something better won't even enter your mind as System 1 takes the reins. This is a bias you can actually use to your advantage. So just like how the government digital service do with their service standard, pattern library, and assessments, they make good design default, thus avoiding the need for each individual member of the team to remember to combat their biases. What innovation driving practices, and we've been through quite a few today, can you bake into your processes? If status quo bias is about getting in the way of innovation in your sector, Look left and right. Sure, you're an energy provider, but how are some of the many subscription services popping up, encouraging retention and referral? Yes, you're a charity, but how are the big brands driving e-commerce? Steal from other sectors' status quos. And comparative research is just one part of a discovery. Again, a great way to bake in an open-minded, data-driven, and user-centered practice to reduce the likelihood that this bias will take over. So remember that slide at the beginning. We have covered just 3: confirmation, optimism, and status quo, and we dabbled in conformity as well with my story at the beginning. But there are so many more mental shortcuts that your mind is taking to field all these daily decisions, like recency bias, which is why politicians try to curry favor just before elections. Affect bias, which is like eating badly when we're stressed out or sad. Framing and anchoring, it's like ordering the second cheapest wine on the menu. And availability bias, this one is the whole reason that the advertising industry exists. If the illusions taught you not to trust your eyes, I hope the biases taught you not to trust your brain, at least not all the time. Just as you know the lines in the Muller-Lyer illusion are in fact the same length, I want you to clock when your system 1 is riding roughshod over system 2 and take back the reins in the moments that count. We will encourage this in ourselves and others if we start to just use these terms like heuristic, mental shortcuts, biases, systematic errors, and systems 1 and 2 in our everyday working lives. Tina, I think your system 1 is taking over here. Want to pick this back up tomorrow? I realize we've covered a lot of ground, and if this presentation has taught you anything, it's that thinking is hard work, so you'll be trying to avoid it at all costs. I summarized the hacks here, but if you take one thing away, just remember that your mind evolved to meet the needs of a world you no longer operate in. So some of the mental illusions you rely upon to make your 20,000 decisions a day are helpful, red is danger, and some act against us, especially in good collaborative business and innovation. Try to spot when your mind is next playing a trick on you and think your way out of it. Ultimately, it's all about knowing thyself, to steal from the ancient Greek maxim. You'll know far better than me the ins and outs of your role, your sector, your specialism. What are your hacks going to be to get the best from you and your business? I've referenced a lot of clever people here, and there's so much more that we already know and more to discover that we haven't yet researched. I'd encourage you to take a look at these resources. And and my whole team here are always up for a discussion about the challenges you're facing externally and internally and how we can combat them. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Yeah, any talk with optical illusions and anamorphs references gets my seal of approval. If anyone has any questions, please do submit them for George. I see we have one here from Sylvia asking about sharing slides and the sources used. Yes, we will be doing that, and we'll be sharing the recordings too. And also asking how they can get in contact with you, George. I'm sure grab you on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I thought that was my last thought before we started. Should have popped my contact details on the last slide. So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, George Moriarty. You can find me there, or hello@Nomensa will get me as well. And the guys can ping on your email.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, George, I'd love to talk, especially what you said about optimism bias, and I'm sure kind of everyone has experienced this. I mean, what advice would you give to someone who identifies that, in their senior team leaders or stakeholders? It can obviously be quite a difficult thing to convince people they're experiencing biases. What advice would you give for people wanting to communicate that to their senior leaders, apart from obviously watching this talk?
Yeah, send them a link. It's a really good question, because the main thing to remember about all of this is that we're trying to minimize cognitive load. So anytime that you're asking someone to counteract a bias, you're asking them to do something their brain is really going to try and avoid doing, which is thinking hard. So I would say the first thing on that is, I mean, we started with the old gorilla video and attention. That's a really key thing. So making sure, so let's say you do have, you know, an external body standing in the way of your new, lovely, innovative solution, service or product. Obviously, the first thing is to get attention. And then I would say in that time that you have with them, focus on, and this is actually something separate from biases, but focus on telling a story, because that we're wired, again, it's kind of based on the same kind of evolutionary foundations. We're wired to hear stories because that's what used to convey information successfully in our little tribes. So I would try and tell a story. So let's say if you're trying to convince an unconvinced stakeholder that a user need really exists, well, why not personify that user need? It's why we use personas, for example. It's why I recommended in this presentation using real people for your research, and then also maybe leveraging that with use of video clips or verbatim. So just trying to tell a human story. So tell a story about humans in a human way, but starting with grabbing that attention, because that's the thing, is to get yourself on the agenda there, I would.
Awesome, thank you so much. Cool, yeah, it doesn't look like we've got any more questions. So if anyone does have any, please submit them kind of now, otherwise I'll kind of wrap everything up. Yeah, George, what a brilliant talk. Like that's, yeah, certainly got me thinking, and I'm sure looking at the chat here, everyone else too. So yeah, thank you very much. We have our next talk is coming up at 1 p.m. today. And that is from Jose Rosa from you and Nomensa's principal designer, Emily Trotter. And they'll be speaking about the collaboration between you, Swissquote, and Nomensa. Please join us then. There's still time to sign up. Just head over to the Eventbrite page or the Collaborate website to grab your free pass. And then a bit later on this afternoon, we have Liz Hubert and Diana Sonis for their session a bit later. Again, thank you so much, George. What a fantastic talk. And yeah, we will see everyone back at 1 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.